Do you remember this past September I told you about one of my favorite public theologian, Nadia Bolz-Weber's theory of old house wiring? She said, human beings, like a lot of old houses where the wiring has not been upgraded, get overloaded when the demands on us are too high. This is the kind of wiring we have in the Parish house. If you dare to try to use both the microwave and the electric kettle at the same time, for example, the wiring's fine, it's safe, it runs all the things, but two appliances plugged into a single outlet and going at the same time is simply beyond its capacity, so it has to shut down. Now, we don't have to go into the basement anymore and find the right fuse in the fuse box and flip it. We just have to stick a pen into that little button in the middle of the outlet. Not in the outlet, but there's that little reset button that I wish we had as well, the reset button. So still, it's easier than it was. Excuse me. I think I have water. So it's easier than it was, but still, you have to pause. And then you make your tea, and then you heat up your lunch. One thing at a time, not both. And if you are desperate for both at the same time, you move one appliance to a different outlet, which is what we did with the coffee maker. Nothing is broken. It just needs some consideration about how much is too much. So Nadia Bolz-Weber says humans are like this too. Our wiring is not broken or faulty, it's just not built for modern times. So when the bad news and the tragedies and the injustices come rushing at us from every corner of the globe, with sounds and images and on a 24-hour-a-day news cycle, we just can't take it in. We blow our fuses. And it's not because we don't care, it's because we do care. We care deeply, and we cannot hold all of the sorrow and outrage and tragedy and cruelty that is in the world right now. Our human wiring just isn't made for it. I'm reminding you of the limits of our human wiring, because for most of us, the news is going to get much harder than it is already, starting on January 20th. And the reasons for rage and outrage and despair are probably going to come fast and furious, and they will be real. But if we try to hold it all, if we try to respond to it all, and if we keep the bad news coming without rest or pause, we're going to blow our fuses. And what this looks like in most human beings is that we become overwhelmed and numb, and then we risk becoming cynical and bitter and contemptuous. Now, you might argue that the conditions on the ground are going to be more than deserving of our cynicism, bitterness, and contempt, and maybe some of us are feeling that way already, and I do understand. But my job in particular is to tend to your souls and to the soul of our community. My job in particular is to help us root ourselves in the values of compassion and kindness, in the practice of democracy, and in the ideal of justice for all people, which is what love looks like in public, to quote Dr. Cornel West. My job in particular is to help us plant ourselves in the ground of our faith which insists that another world is possible, and that to create that other world, we have to use better tools and we have to build differently. Hatred, intolerance, fear, power over instead of power with, the exploitation of the planet, the belief that there will never be enough, that we could never have enough, and that some people's lives have far more value than other people's lives. Well, that is what landed us here. And the only way to do something new is to believe that we can. The only way to do something new is to imagine that better world and what that world is made of, and then to start and keep practicing those things in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, no matter how small, how local, how insignificant it might feel. So if we are afraid that the end of democracy is on the way, how we keep it alive is to imagine what democracy looks like and feels like when it is healthy and strong. And then we practice the democracy we imagine everywhere we can, anywhere we can, even if the only place we can actually do that is our own dinner table. Nadia Bolz-Weber says that in order to keep her fuses from blowing, she asks herself 3 questions every day, and you might remember what they are, because some of us have been talking about them all fall. She asks herself, what is mine to do and what is not mine to do? What is mine to say and what is not mine to say? And what is mine to care about and what is not mine to care about? And this third question is not to imply that there are any people or issues that are not worthy of our care, simply that we cannot care about everything. We cannot give ourselves to everything, and so we have to choose what is mine. What is mine to do? What is mine to say? What is mine to care about? And this morning I want to add a 4th question to those 3. What is mine to imagine? What is mine to imagine? And how do I keep what I imagine in front of me? How do I keep it before my eyes? How do I tattoo it on my shoulders and inscribe it on my heart? Imagination seems to get harder for a lot of us grown-ups. Maybe that's particularly true for those of us who are not artists and poets and musicians. We forget how to imagine, or maybe it feels too risky, because to imagine is to claim what we want, what we so deeply hope for, what we dream of, and that is a vulnerable and a tender thing. And maybe imagination takes a certain kind of freedom that most adults don't have enough of. It takes creativity and time. It takes making a little bit of space in our worried minds. And it's hard to give ourselves that. I got to have a little conversation with Beth Williams, who's 8 years old, the daughter of our director of spiritual exploration. It was at our staff lunch this week. Beth's imagination is wild. She was imagining dinosaurs coming back to Earth, and specifically imagining them coming back to this church in particular, and wondering in great detail if they would fit inside and if they would fit where they would fit. She was imagining woolly mammoths that were tiny instead of huge. And then what would we call them if the woolly mammoths weren't mammoth? And she was imagining about 400 other things in the space of 4 minutes. She was imagining entire worlds in between bites of cheese and raspberries. And listening to her, I thought, this is what we need. We are going to need imagination to get us through the next 4 years and whatever comes after that. We are going to need the imagination to dream of new worlds, to envision something different, more beautiful, more whole. And we are going to need to find ways to hold on to these dreams, these imaginings, to paint pictures of them and write poems about them and make songs about them and keep them in our minds and on our hearts. So much around us is going to contradict what we believe in and what we dream of. So we are going to have to imagine strongly and fiercely and stubbornly, because how can we bring something different into being if we cannot begin to imagine it? Several years ago, I had a conversation with someone who was thinking about attending divinity school and then going into parish ministry. It was a woman my age, so a second career for her, and she wanted to know what my life was like. She wanted to get a better picture of what was at the end of the road she was thinking about starting on. I thought this was a really wise idea, because even if you're a church person, you might not have much idea what I actually do all week. You might think I work a couple of hours on Sunday mornings. I think some of the little ones imagine I live here. A couple of years ago, one of them asked me where in the church I sleep and if I wear this when I do. Anyway, this woman and I met for coffee, and I asked her what she thought being a minister was like. And it quickly became clear she thought ministry involved spending hours each week reading books about spirituality and thinking about them, and also taking walks in nature while listening to inspirational podcasts, and also going to retreats and conferences, all of which sound quite lovely, and absolutely none of which I do. I am imagining days of uninterrupted reading and deep reflection, she told me, at which point I know I started to laugh hysterically, which in retrospect is probably not as kind as I should have been. I told her what being a minister is actually like, at least in my personal experience, and that it does involve a lot of interruptions, so many that they can't even be considered interruptions, because responding to what happens in any given week is such a big part of the job. I don't remember all of what I said, but I do remember her response. She kept saying, "I can't really imagine that." "I go to a lot of meetings," I said. "I can't really imagine that." "I buy snacks for a lot of those meetings. I go to the grocery store kind of a lot, actually. I can't really imagine that. I visit people in the hospital or at home when they are really sick or dying. I can't really imagine that. People come to my office to talk to me most days. Sometimes for most days, people come in to talk to me. I can't really imagine that." And finally, I asked her gently, I hope, "If you cannot really imagine any of it, do you think it is the right path?" Now, of course, we don't know the future. Imagination is not prophecy or prediction, and God knows most of the things we imagine don't turn out how we imagined them. Sometimes they're not even close. But that's not the point, really. The point is holding on to what we believe in, what we dream of, what we most deeply hope for our own lives, for our loved ones, for our communities, for our country. And if we let go of that, then we really will have lost something we may not be able to get back. I think our congregation's tradition of inviting you to choose a word for the new year is a way to ask you to imagine something important. We've been inviting people to do this instead of making New Year's resolutions for, I think, 20 years now. And the way it works is that we choose a word that is about something we hope for, something we yearn for, something we need. Maybe it's a word that chooses us. And then we try to pay attention to that word, to wait on that word, to invite that word and listen for it and seek it out and imagine it and see how it shows up in the year ahead. So we create space for that word to come into our lives. So I invite you to imagine a word for this new year that lies before us. What will you dare to hope for? What do you need? What does the world need from you? What can you imagine? 2025 needs all of our good words. The UU minister, Reverend Ashley Horan, writes, "Another world is possible." We say it again and again, even when the proof lies somewhere beyond the horizon. This is our faith. Another world is possible.